Hi there, and welcome back to Riella's Army of Dolls, where I talk all things fashion doll. And thank you so much to this viewer request for asking to see a little bit more of my resin BJDs and a comparison of the most popular of those brands. So lined up behind me, I've arranged sort of an example of most of my resin BJD fashion dolls. And note that if you are a BJD collector, there is a difference between a normal BJD and a BJD fashion doll. So these ones are, of course, they are still made of resin, they are still strung with elastic, ball jointed, but they have the scale and proportions of a fashion doll rather than a body that tries to mimic a real person's shape and that slightly oversized head with an anime aesthetic. These ones are instead more like the proportions of a Barbie or a Tonner doll with a skinnier mannequin style body, a head that is more scaled to a real person, and feet usually with an arch to fit fashion shoes. So up here I've arranged some of the most popular ones. The Sybarites from London, they do have both vinyl and resin dolls. They have roughly the same body. This is the resin one. This is an older version of the DAE Vivian doll. She doesn't have jointed elbows, but she is nonetheless an early style of that resin version. And beside her, I've got another early style resin doll. This is one of the early releases of the Elizabeth Bazell doll from Joseph Zakeras, who's now making the Glamourous dolls right here in Australia. This one is a Ficondoll. This one is a Deva doll. This one is a Kingdom doll. Then I've got a Jamieshow, and over here, one of the Tonner releases that is made from resin. Down the bottom, I've got a Modsdoll. She is sitting down because I do find her quite kicky to pose, but also because I ran out of space. Up the back, there are a whole mix of dolls, not all resin ones. The only other different one is this lady in the corner from Dollmore. All of these dolls are technically speaking 16-inch or 40-centimeter fashion dolls, but there are loads of differences. Some of them can share clothes well, some of them can't. Some of them can share shoes, some of them can't. So let's get them on the mat and see what they have in common. To simplify the comparison, I've narrowed the dolls down primarily to the ones who are still being released and you can buy now, or who are quite readily available on the secondary market. Some of the other dolls really are just too hard to find. So as a point of comparison, I've got a Tonner Tyler doll here, so she is a vinyl doll to see the difference. And then I have the Robert Tonner BJD version of the Tyler, the Jamieshow doll, the Sybarite, the Kingdom doll, and the Ficon. So most of these four on the end here, are currently still being released. There are a few things to know about these dolls before I get started. First of all, pretty much all of these have different variations and versions of the body. I'm just showing one of them. Generally speaking, this is the most common of the body styles that you're going to find, but yours could have some differences. Jamieshow in particular, there have been at least 3 quite different variations. This is not the absolute current one coming out, but I would say that she's the most common body type that you'll find on the secondary market. This is a standard Jamieshow body. If yours is called either Jamieshow Glam or Jamieshow Glam Retro, then she's going to have a different body. The second thing to say about these dolls that you won't be able to see on the video is that they are heavy. Resin is a heavy product compared with vinyl. The Tyler weighs 280 grams and she is the lightest of all, even lighter than the Ficon, who is super skinny in comparison. The Tyler BJD weighs more than 100 grams more than Tyler. She weighs 387 grams. The Jamieshow, roughly the same. She's 385. Sybarite is by far the heaviest. She weighs 545 grams. The Kingdom doll, very skinny, but still 331 grams. And the Ficon is 292. She is the skinniest and therefore the lightest of all the resin dolls. The other thing to mention is, of course, that all of the BJDs have bald heads. Resin really cannot be implanted with hair, so they wear wigs. The Jamieshow one you can purchase a special wig cap for, which replaces that cap there, but she still has a bald head. This doll here, the Sybarites always come with their wig glued on, and it's impractical to take it off. You can, but it's impractical, so that's why she has hair, whereas the vinyl, she of course has rooted hair. You can get some that have wig caps, but it is more common to have rooted hair. A few more obvious points before we get into the nitty-gritty. First one is jointing. The vinyl doll has fairly standard vinyl jointing. She doesn't have an ankle joint. She has a split at the waist so she can swivel, and a joint just below her bust to give her some movement there. She also, of course, has standard knee, elbow and wrist joints, as well as the neck. So basically you can see that all these dolls have variations on that. The biggest difference is that all of the resin dolls have a joint at the ankle. This is much easier for stringing resin dolls, as they need to have a hook above their foot to latch on, and that is how the string goes through their body. When it comes to the torso joints, that's where we see a little bit more difference. Not all of them. The Ficon does not have a joint above her hips. All of the others do, although the Tyler doll is much higher. Keep in mind that she is by far the earliest of the BJDs here, and so her jointing is, I guess, perhaps a little bit more clunky, a little bit less refined. The other thing we can see that these dolls all have, which the vinyl doll doesn't, is some kind of joint between the upper leg and the thigh. That allows them to swivel and have greater movement. So most of them just have a line split, whereas again the Tyler, she is an earlier doll, has an actual ball there. Now when it comes to knee and elbow joints, there are two different kinds. They're what we call single joints and double joints. Generally speaking, in the BJD collector world, double joints are considered to be better because they allow better movement. What we mean by double joint is something that actually has a piece in the middle, so a joint at each side. So double joint as opposed to just a single piece here. The disadvantage of a single piece is that it can only click in and out once, so its range of motion is less. So as you can see, the Tyler and the Jamieshow have single joints in both elbows and knees, whereas the other three dolls have double joints in their elbows. The Sybarite has a little ball in there. The other two have slightly more refined version of the same thing, allowing them to bend nearly the whole way. I don't necessarily love the look of a double joint when it is fully bent, but it is very functional in terms of allowing them to bend a long way. Those two, Ficon and Kingdom doll, both have double joints in the knees as well. Again, when you bend it, that does mean you end up with this piece in the middle. Personally, I don't find super attractive. It takes a little bit away from the realism, but it does allow that really good posing. Sybarite, on the other hand, has only a single joint at the knee. Jamieshow doll, she only has single joints, but personally I do find them quite beautiful because they just have a really nice bend in them. But again, they don't bend as far as the others. Because of the way the elastic works, they also all have this split above the thigh, which is usually covered by clothing. It is a little bit odd, the appearance on the Sybarite, because there's just quite a lot of it. The vinyl doll, of course, doesn't need to because she has an internal joint there, and so that gives her a smoother look around that area. Aesthetically speaking, the dolls have a lot of similarities, but they also, at least in some cases, are quite different. Generally speaking, I've arranged them in an order that I feel aligns them fairly aesthetically. These three here visually look quite similar shape and form. They have a less defined sense to them. They have a slightly pointier bust and a higher waist. The Jamieshow doll is definitively the most beautiful of these three, but as I said, keep in mind that these two are earlier. Jamieshow has had a lot of time to refine that. I find her, looking at her, to be the most realistic of all 5 in terms of, you know, a human-like form rather than very exaggerated. The Sybarite in the middle sort of bridges that. You know, she is attempting to be a bit more refined than the Tonner, but still has that sort of harsh kind of square lines. And then her legs look a lot more like the other 3 in terms of being very fine, very skinny. I find her a slightly odd doll to look at. They look amazing dressed. You know, when I pulled this doll off the shelf and was dressing and playing with her, I just could not stop thinking how amazingly beautiful the whole design was. But when I take her clothes off, I actually find her the least attractive. A slightly clunky body shape that can't decide between being super duper skinny and, you know, somewhat realistic. She again has the quite pointy bust, squarish waist, and then, yeah, these very skinny legs. Kingdom Doll and Ficon look very similar. They have a lot of similarities. Ficon looks visibly a little skinnier, but overall they are the skinny doll, very shapely waist, curved bust, small head, and skinny legs that are very similar in terms of their shape. All of these dolls, technically speaking, are 40 centimetre doll or 16 inch. I have measured them all. There are, again, they're sort of grouped together. Both forms of the Tyler and the Jamieshow doll come out as nearly exactly 40 centimetres, with the resin Tyler being just slightly tallest of them all. The Sybarite doll looks visually the tallest, and she comes out as just over 41 centimetres. These two look visually shorter, and they are at around 39 for the Kingdom doll and the same for the Ficon. When it comes to other measurements, we can see similar comparisons happening. Across the bust, the majority of the dolls end up at about 8.5 centimetres. The first 3, again, very similar, the Jamieshow being a little bit smaller. And then the Sybarite, although she was taller, she again ends up being even a tad skinnier across there. And the Kingdom doll and the Ficon significantly smaller, getting closer to 7.5 centimetres for each of those. The waist, although it is at a slightly different point for each doll, ends up again fairly similar. We get about 3.5 centimetres for the majority of the dolls. The Sybarite, who looks a little bit skinnier, is at closer to 3. These two around 3 to 3.5. Hips, the other important point across, we get about 6.5 centimetres for most of the doll. Jamieshow, slightly smaller. Sybarite actually has her widest point significantly lower, but it is about the same measurement. Kingdom doll and Ficon just fractionally skinnier than the others. No other really significant differences are revealed when looking at the back of the dolls. Some of them have a slightly larger buttocks, but generally speaking, the form stays pretty much the same. We can see a little bit larger on the Kingdom doll, the Sybarite, and the Jamieshow than any of the others. And again, we get a much less definition from the Tonner BJD. The other thing that this sort of highlights to me is the blushing that each doll has. Ficon, I don't actually see any visible blushing. She has a lot of form, and that, you know, is highlighted with some shadows, but I can't see any blushing. Kingdom doll has a significant amount of blushing in all of her curves and dips, as does the Sybarite. See them at the joints and, you know, in the dips. Jamieshow has a small amount, and Tonner, of course, doesn't have any. You may have noticed, I've been looking at them, the colour difference between particularly the Tonner BJD. She is extremely yellow. Now that is because of her age. This doll is significantly older than all the others. Resin does go yellow. If you haven't had a resin doll for very long, you may not be aware, but resin is simply a product that yellows over time. She's the oldest doll, so she has yellowed the most, but I would expect the others to yellow at least somewhat with time. Looking at the doll's hands is actually probably where I see the least difference, although it is where the blushing on Ficon finally shows. Her hands are actually one of her best features. They are the most dainty of all of them, and they have really refined blushing, which is surprising when the blushing really isn't visible anywhere else. But when it comes down to it, the hands on all the dolls really do resemble each other. The Ficon, I think, is just slightly the most refined. The Sybarite are definitively the biggest, but actually they are still quite lovely. And the others are all, you know, within a range of similar. The Tonna is the least refined, but when it comes to the hands, they are still quite dainty and beautiful. And you can see a significant difference between the resin hand and the vinyl hand, as the vinyl one has all its fingers together. These ones have to be molded in a factory, and so they're just a less dainty piece, whereas this one has individual fingers. Feet are also an interesting area of comparison, as fashion dolls tend to have these very sculpted, shapely, curved feet, and BJDs even more so than many others. They're really known for their super arched feet, and that can make it very hard to find shoes for them. We can see quite a few similarities. Now, I know from trial and error that generally speaking, Jamieshow can fit Tonna shoes, and you can see there that the arch is very, very close. And although the vinyl Tyler doesn't have the ankle joint, you can see here that the foot is near on identical in its form. The Jamieshow one is a little bit more defined in its sculpting, but its arch is nearly the same, and the heel with this quite pointed shape is again nearly the same. The other three are all much harder to get shoes for. They have much more pointed toes and a higher arch. And I'm actually surprised to see on the video that the Ficon foot actually looks almost the most sharply pointed and arched of all. They are all of them quite exaggerated, with the Kingdom doll being slightly less than the other two, which are look extremely close. From this view, it would look like Ficon and Sybarite may be able to share shoes. When it comes to posing, keep in mind that this Tonna is actually one of the best posing vinyl dolls out there. So I've tried to put all the dolls into one of the most tricky poses that they can, which is sitting across their legs with a hand touching their face and the other hand on the head. And you can see that this doll can put a hand on her head. She can't get this one any closer to her face, and her legs, although she can bend her knees and sort of spread them wide, she can't get them anywhere near under her, because that's just the nature of those vinyl joints. And so if we now have a look at her compared with the other dolls, you'll see the massive difference. And this is also where you see the real difference between the double joints and the single joints, because these first two dolls are really struggling to get that pose or to hold it. I did manage to get Jamieshow's legs a little bit further under, but she couldn't hold them there. They have popped back out. The Tonnas have sort of pushed in, partly because they're so loose. She's also managed to get her hand a little bit closer to her face than Jamieshow. And again, you can force their hands closer than that, but because of this single jointing, they can't actually touch their face. The next two look incredibly elegant. I actually love the way the Sybarite poses. She's perhaps my favorite of all of them. The way her knees have bent is really realistic to me, and that's even though her knees are single jointed. Her torso actually bends in a really fluid way, and although she can't touch her face, she can get relatively close. Same is said for the Kingdom doll. She hasn't managed to touch her face, but it is close. The nature of her thigh joint is that it quite pops out when she needs to do this sort of pose, and that looks a little bit jarring to me. But her knees manage to bend a really long way and get a really good range of motion. Ficon is far and away the winner in this posing contest. Her hand is on her face. I could actually get it in all sorts of different poses on her face. She's the only one who can fully touch it. Her knees have also bent the entire way back. One of them is sort of clicked out, but the other one is fully locked in and it's still bending the whole way back. So I'm incredibly impressed with how well the Ficon has posed. She is the clear winner of this, while I would give the most natural pose to the Sybarite. Now, especially if you're buying hard cap wigs for your dolls, the head size really does make a difference. And even for regular elasticized wigs, you're going to find that some of them will fit some dolls and not others. So I've arranged them here in largest head to smallest head. The difference is only a couple of millimeters for some of them, but the difference between Sybarite and Ficon is pretty significant. We can see that her head is the biggest. Even if I took the wig off, it would be biggest, followed by Tonner, who is extremely close in size to the Jamieshow, but is slightly more rounded. The Kingdom doll is definitely a tad smaller than Jamieshow, but still has a slightly oversized head. The Ficondoll is going for the most realistically sized head. It is significantly smaller than the others, even than the Kingdom doll. That said, I'm sure there will be a little crossover of wigs between those two. When it comes to the fit of clothing, this is also a pretty good grouping. We can see that these three are quite similar in their size and are most often going to fit the same clothes and also the same clothes as the Vinyl Tyler doll. On the other hand, these two are significantly skinnier. They should usually be able to share clothing between them, but probably not between the others unless you want it to be either quite baggy or quite tight.